The moment my grandson whispered those 7 words into my ear, my entire body went cold. I was sitting alone near the back of the church, watching my son Ethan smile at the woman he was about to marry. Everyone else saw a beautiful wedding. I saw a family slowly slipping away from me. Then 10-year-old Mason grabbed my hand. His face was pale. He leaned close and whispered, "Grandma." Savannah isn't really Savannah. For a second, I couldn't breathe, because the fear I'd been carrying for months suddenly felt terrifyingly real. Before I tell you what happened next, I'd love to hear from you. If this story touches you in any way, please like and subscribe. And while you're listening, leave a comment telling me what you would have done in my place. Also, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. Sometimes it's comforting to know we're not alone when life takes an unexpected turn. My name is London Harrison. I am 68 years old, and until 2 years ago, I believed I understood my family better than anyone. I had been married to my husband Charles for 44 years. We met in Columbus, Ohio, when I was only 22 and working at a small bookstore downtown. Charles was a mechanic with rough hands, a crooked smile, and a habit of bringing me coffee every Friday afternoon. We built our life slowly. There was no family money, no inheritance, no wealthy relatives, just 2 people who worked hard. Charles eventually opened his own repair shop. I became a school secretary. We saved every dollar we could, bought a modest house, and raised our only son, Ethan. Ethan was my entire world. He was the kind of little boy who left handwritten notes on my kitchen counter. He hugged me before school every morning. Even after he graduated college, he called me every Sunday without fail. When Charles passed away after a brief illness, Ethan became my strength. He came over almost every evening. He fixed things around my house. He brought groceries. Sometimes he simply sat beside me on the porch while we watched the sunset. "I've got you, Mom," he would tell me, and I believed him. 3 years after losing Charles, Ethan married his first wife, Jennifer. Their marriage didn't last. They were young, constantly arguing, and eventually divorced when their son Mason was only 5 years old. The divorce hurt Ethan deeply. For months, he barely smiled. He threw himself into work and spent every free moment with Mason. Those years brought our family closer. My grandson became the light inside our home. Mason had Charles's eyes. He asked endless questions. He loved old photographs. He sat beside me every Saturday while I baked pies, and he listened to every story about his grandfather, as if hearing them for the first time. "Tell me about Grandpa fixing cars again," he would say, and I always did. He was only 10 years old, but he had the kind of heart that made people feel seen. After Charles died, Mason often climbed into the chair beside me. "I don't want you to be lonely, Grandma." No child should understand loneliness so well, yet somehow he did. For a while, life settled into something peaceful. Not perfect, but peaceful. Then Ethan met Savannah. He called me one evening. "Mom, I met someone." I remember smiling. I wanted him to be happy. Lord knows I wanted that. He brought Savannah to dinner 2 weeks later. She arrived wearing a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment had years ago. She was beautiful, tall, elegant, perfect makeup, perfect smile. She brought flowers. Expensive flowers? She hugged me. "It's so wonderful to finally meet Ethan's mother." Everything sounded right. Everything looked right. But something inside me felt uneasy. Perhaps older women develop instincts because life forces us to. Savannah spoke beautifully, yet somehow never said very much. She complimented my house. She complimented my cooking. She complimented my garden. But every compliment felt rehearsed. At one point, she looked around my living room. "This neighborhood has become very valuable, hasn't it?" I smiled. "I suppose so." "And you've owned this house a long time." 40 years. She nodded. Smart investment. Investment. The word stayed with me. Charles and I never thought of this house as an investment. It was where Ethan took his first steps, where Christmas trees stood every December, where we buried our old dog in the backyard, where Charles kissed me goodbye on the morning he died. It wasn't property. It was our life. After dinner, Savannah walked through nearly every room. She admired the furniture, asked questions about insurance, asked whether the house was paid off, asked if I lived alone. Perhaps those questions sound harmless. Maybe they were. But I remember standing in my kitchen washing dishes while something inside me whispered that this woman wasn't simply curious. She was measuring, evaluating, calculating. Ethan noticed my silence. "What do you think of her mom?" I hesitated. "She seems very polished." He laughed. "That's your way of saying you don't like her." "No, it's my way of saying I don't know her." He put his hand on my shoulder. "You will." I wanted to believe him. Months passed. Savannah became a regular part of our lives. She attended holidays. She brought expensive wine. She talked about traveling investments and luxury resorts. Yet she never spoke much about her own family. Whenever I asked about her parents, she changed the subject. Whenever I asked where she grew up, her answers seemed vague. Mason noticed things too. Children always do. One afternoon, while we baked cookies, he asked me, "Grandma, why doesn't Savannah smile with her eyes?" I stopped stirring the batter. "What do you mean?" "Dad smiles with his eyes." He pointed toward one of Charles's photographs. "Grandpa did too." He shrugged. "But Savannah only smiles with her mouth." I laughed softly. Children say strange things. Yet his words stayed with me. As the months passed, Ethan slowly changed. He still visited, but less often. Sunday phone calls became every other week. Sometimes Savannah answered his phone. Sometimes he canceled dinner. Sometimes he seemed distracted, tired, different. One evening, I asked if he wanted to come over for meatloaf. "We already have plans." Another Sunday, "Maybe next week, Mom." The distance arrived slowly enough that I almost didn't notice it. Until one day, I did. The biggest change happened with Mason. Whenever Savannah visited, he became quiet. He no longer talked as much. He stayed in his room. One afternoon, I asked him why. He looked down at his shoes. "I don't think she likes me." My heart broke. "Why would you say that?" He hesitated. "She says kids should stay out of grown-up business." "What business?" He shook his head. "I don't know." That answer bothered me very much. Still, I told myself I was imagining things. Perhaps I was simply a widowed mother struggling to accept change. Perhaps I was afraid of losing my son. Perhaps grief had made me overly protective. Then one afternoon, Ethan called. "Mom," I proposed. I forced excitement into my voice. "Oh, sweetheart, congratulations. We're getting married in October." October. Only 6 months away. Everything suddenly seemed rushed, too rushed. But I swallowed my concerns. Because mothers eventually learn that grown children hear criticism even when none is intended. That night, after we hung up, I sat alone in Charles's old chair. His photograph sat beside me. I looked at his smile, and for the first time in years, I whispered aloud, "Charles, I wish you were here." because something in my heart felt wrong, and I was beginning to fear that I might be the only person who could see it. The first few months after Ethan introduced Savannah were filled with dinners, holidays, and polite conversations. At least, that was how it looked from the outside. Everyone who met her seemed impressed. She dressed beautifully. She spoke softly. She remembered birthdays. She sent expensive gifts. Even my church friends thought she was wonderful. "Your son found himself a classy woman," my friend Linda told me one Sunday. I smiled, but something still felt wrong. One afternoon, Savannah invited me to lunch at a small cafe downtown. At first, I thought she genuinely wanted to get to know me. She asked about Charles. She asked about my work at the school. She listened carefully. Then the conversation changed. "So, Ethan mentioned your husband owned his own business." "He did." "Did he leave you investments?" I looked at her. "A few." "Retirement accounts?" "Some." "Property besides the house?" I took a sip of my coffee. "Why do you ask?" She laughed lightly. "Oh, I'm just trying to understand the family." The family? Again, it sounded harmless. Yet it didn't feel harmless. Most people ask about memories. She asked about assets. Most people ask about children. She asked about ownership. After lunch, I drove home, feeling uncomfortable. I sat in my kitchen staring at Charles's photograph. He had always been a good judge of people. He used to tell me, "Pay attention to the questions people ask. They reveal what matters to them." And Savannah's questions seemed to revolve around only one thing: money. A few weeks later, Ethan and Savannah came for dinner. Mason arrived shortly afterward. He immediately ran to hug me. "Grandma, can we make cookies later?" "Of course." Savannah smiled. "You spoil him." I laughed. "That's part of the grandmother job." She sat down at the table. "Children need structure." Mason quietly looked down. Ethan changed the subject. But something about her tone bothered me. As dinner continued, Savannah walked around my dining room. Her eyes stopped at an old wooden cabinet. Charles had built it himself 30 years earlier. "That's beautiful." "He made it." She touched the wood. "Antique furniture can be worth a fortune." I smiled politely. "It isn't for sale." "Oh, I didn't mean that." But her eyes lingered. Everything seemed to have a price. After dinner, Mason and I made chocolate chip cookies in the kitchen. He sat on the counter while I mixed the dough. He looked unusually quiet. Finally, he asked, "Grandma." "Yes, sweetheart." "Do you trust Savannah?" I nearly dropped the spoon. "Why would you ask that?" He shrugged. "She asks weird questions." "What kind of questions?" He lowered his voice. "She asked where Dad keeps papers." "What papers?" "I don't know." He looked nervous. "She asked if Grandpa left things for Dad." I stayed very still. "What did you tell her?" "Nothing." He looked at me. I didn't like it. Children often notice things adults ignore. At 10 years old, Mason had no reason to be suspicious. He wasn't interested in money. He wasn't thinking about inheritance. He simply reacted to how people made him feel, and Savannah made him uncomfortable. A month later, Ethan invited me to dinner at his house. Savannah had moved in by then. Everything inside looked different. The furniture had changed. The photographs had changed. Even Charles's old picture that Ethan kept in the living room had disappeared. I noticed immediately. "What happened to your father's photo?" Ethan looked uncomfortable. "Oh, Savannah thought the room needed updating." Updating. That word hurt. Charles had been dead only 2 years. Now his picture sat in a hallway upstairs. As we ate dinner, Savannah spoke about wedding venues. She wanted a luxury hotel, a large guest list, professional decorators, an expensive photographer. Ethan looked overwhelmed. "That sounds expensive," she smiled. "You only get married once." I nearly said something, but I didn't. Later that evening, I helped Mason clean the dishes. He quietly asked me, "Grandma, do you think Grandpa would like Savannah?" The question broke my heart. "I don't know." He looked sad. "I don't think he would." "Why?" "Because Grandpa loved people." I stared at him. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "She only likes important people." That stayed with me. Over the next few months, Ethan began changing in ways I couldn't ignore. He missed Sunday dinners. He stopped calling regularly. When I invited him over, Savannah often answered, "We already have plans. Ethan's busy. We'll let you know." Sometimes I would call him directly. His answers became shorter, more distant. One evening, I asked, "Is everything okay?" He sighed. "Mom, you worry too much." "I'm your mother. It's my job." He laughed softly, but there was no warmth behind it. Then something happened that truly frightened me. One Saturday afternoon, I arrived at Ethan's house to drop off Mason's birthday gift. I wasn't expected. As I walked toward the front door, I heard voices inside. Savannah was speaking. She lives alone." I stopped. Ethan said something quietly. Savannah replied, "The house is too much for her anyway." My heart began beating faster. Ethan answered again, but I couldn't hear. Then Savannah said something that made me freeze. "Eventually we'll have to make decisions." Decisions. About what? About whom? I rang the doorbell. The conversation immediately stopped. Savannah opened the door, smiling. "London, what a surprise." Inside, Ethan seemed uncomfortable. Nobody mentioned the conversation. Nobody explained. I stayed only 20 minutes. Driving home, my hands shook on the steering wheel. For the first time, I wondered whether I was losing my son. Not because he had fallen in love, but because someone else had begun speaking for him. 2 weeks later, Savannah came to visit me alone. She brought flowers. We sat on the porch. The conversation seemed pleasant. Then she asked a question. "Have you ever thought about downsizing?" I looked at her. "What do you mean? This house is large." I smiled politely. "I've lived here 40 years. She nodded. "Senior communities can be wonderful." I felt my chest tighten. "I'm not moving." "Oh, of course not now." She reached for her tea. "But eventually, everyone needs help." Everyone. The way she said it made me feel old, fragile, temporary. When she finally left, I sat alone for a long time. That evening, I opened Charles's desk. Inside were his letters, documents, and photographs. At the bottom sat an envelope with his handwriting. For London. I held it for several minutes. I had never opened it. I wasn't ready. Not yet. As I returned the envelope to the drawer, the phone rang. It was Mason. His voice sounded small. "Grandma." "Yes, sweetheart." "Can I stay with you this weekend?" "Of course." He became quiet. Then he whispered something that sent a chill through me. "I don't think Savannah likes our family very much." And for the first time, I began to wonder if my grandson could see something that the rest of us had completely missed. The wedding invitation arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I found it sitting inside my mailbox beneath grocery coupons and utility bills. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and sealed with gold wax. My name was written in elegant handwriting. For a moment, I smiled. No matter how uneasy I had become, Ethan was still my son. This was still his wedding. I carried the invitation into the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea before opening it. Inside was a beautiful card. Savannah and Ethan request the honor of your presence. The ceremony would take place at St. Andrew's Church outside Columbus, followed by a reception at an expensive country club. Everything looked perfect until I reached the seating information. My smile slowly disappeared. The ceremony seating chart placed me in the 4th row, not beside Ethan's family, not near Mason, not near anyone I knew. The front rows were reserved for Savannah's relatives and several business associates. I read the card again. Surely there had been a mistake. The mother of the groom does not sit in the 4th row, at least not where I come from. I called Ethan that evening. "Sweetheart, I received the invitation." "Great. Isn't it beautiful?" "It is." I hesitated. "My seat seems a little unusual." There was silence. "What do you mean?" "I'm sitting in the 4th row." "Oh." Another pause. "Savannah handled the seating." "I see. I wouldn't worry about it, Mom." I swallowed my disappointment. "I only thought, it's not a big deal." Not a big deal. Those words hurt more than the seating assignment. After we hung up, I sat quietly in my living room. Charles would never have allowed something like this. Not because he cared about appearances, but because he understood respect. Several days later, Mason came to spend the weekend with me. He arrived carrying his backpack and his favorite baseball cap. As soon as he entered the house, he hugged me tightly. "You okay, Grandma?" I smiled. Why wouldn't I be? He shrugged. "You sound sad." Children notice everything. I didn't answer. Instead, we baked cinnamon rolls together. Later that evening, while watching television, Mason suddenly asked, "Why aren't you sitting with Dad at the wedding?" I looked at him. "Who told you that?" I saw the chart. "What chart?" "The one Savannah was making." My stomach tightened. "What did she say?" He became quiet. "She said older people don't need front seats." The room suddenly felt cold. "What else did she say?" Mason stared at the floor. "She said nobody notices anyway." I felt my heart break. Not because of the seat, not because of the wedding, but because my grandson had heard those words. The next week, Savannah invited several women from both families to lunch. I decided to attend. Perhaps I still hoped we could build some kind of relationship. The restaurant was expensive. Everything about Savannah's life seemed expensive. As we sat together, one of her friends asked me, "You must be so proud of Ethan." "I am." Savannah smiled. "Ethan works incredibly hard. He always has." One woman asked, "Did he inherit his work ethic from his father?" Before I could answer, Savannah spoke. "Well, Ethan really built himself." Something inside me stung. Charles had worked 2 jobs to send Ethan to college. I had spent years helping with tuition bills. We had sacrificed so much. Yet Savannah spoke as though Ethan had appeared from nowhere. Later, as the women discussed honeymoon plans, I excused myself to visit the restroom. As I walked back down the hallway, I heard voices. Savannah was speaking to one of her bridesmaids. I stopped without meaning to. "After the wedding, everything changes." Her friend laughed. "You finally get your happy ending." Savannah answered quietly, "I'll finally have everything organized." "What about his mother?" A brief pause. "She won't be an issue." My blood ran cold. I stood there for several seconds. Perhaps they were discussing something harmless. Perhaps I misunderstood. Yet the words stayed with me. "She won't be an issue." When I returned to the table, Savannah smiled warmly. "Everything okay?" "Yes," I lied. That evening, I drove to the cemetery. I often visited Charles when life became difficult. I sat beside his grave with fresh flowers. The sky was gray. The wind was cold. "I don't know what to do," I whispered. For the first time since his death, I felt truly alone. Because Ethan no longer listened. And I was beginning to question my own judgment. Maybe I was jealous. Maybe I was overprotective. Maybe grief had made me suspicious. But deep inside, another voice kept saying the same thing. "Pay attention." A few days later, I stopped by Ethan's house to drop off a casserole. Nobody answered the front door. As I turned to leave, I noticed the garage door partially open. Inside sat several boxes. One box had fallen over. Papers had spilled onto the floor. I had no intention of looking. But one document caught my eye. My address. I froze. My house address. I stepped closer. Before I could read anything else, I heard footsteps. Mason appeared. "Grandma." I quickly looked away. "What are you doing here?" "Dad had to work." He looked nervous. Then he picked up one of the papers. "Savannah gets mad if I touch these." "What are they?" He shook his head. "I don't know." He lowered his voice. "But she keeps asking about your house." I tried to remain calm. "What exactly does she ask?" "She asks where Grandpa kept papers." "What papers?" "I don't know." He swallowed. "She asked if you have a will." My chest tightened. No 10-year-old should know words like that. No child should be involved in adult matters. That night, I barely slept. Around midnight, I walked downstairs. Charles's desk sat in the corner of the living room. I opened the drawer again. The envelope was still there, for London. I finally opened it. Inside was a letter. His handwriting looked exactly the same. "My darling London, if you're reading this, I am no longer there to protect you. Please, remember something. Never let anyone make you feel like a burden. This house belongs to your memories, your heart, and your future. Trust your instincts. They have never failed you." I began crying because for months I had ignored my instincts. I had convinced myself that I was imagining things. But Charles had always trusted my judgment, and perhaps I needed to trust it too. The following weekend, Ethan called. "Mom Savannah wants everyone together next Friday." "For what?" "Wedding planning." I hesitated. "Of course." As we prepared to hang up, he said something that troubled me. "Try to keep an open mind." "What does that mean?" "It's just, Savannah feels like you've been distant." I nearly laughed. Distant? I was the one being moved to the fourth row. I was the one being excluded. But somehow, I had become the problem. After the call ended, I looked out my kitchen window. The leaves had begun to change. October was approaching. The wedding was getting closer, and the closer it came, the more frightened I became, because I could feel something moving beneath the surface of our family, something hidden, something dangerous, and I still didn't know exactly what it was. The rehearsal dinner took place on a Thursday evening at an upscale restaurant overlooking the river. I almost didn't go. After everything that had happened during the previous weeks, every family gathering felt like walking into a room where everyone knew something I didn't. Still, Ethan was my son, and despite everything, I loved him. I arrived 15 minutes early. Old habits die hard. Charles always believed that arriving late showed disrespect, and after 44 years of marriage, his habits had become mine. The hostess escorted me to a private dining room decorated with white roses and candles. A long table stretched across the room. Place cards sat neatly beside each plate. I immediately looked for my name. My seat was at the very end, across from two distant relatives of Savannah. Far from Ethan, far from Mason, far from the wedding party. For several seconds, I simply stared at the card. London Harrison, at the end. Again. Savannah entered the room moments later. She wore a dark green dress and an expensive smile. "Oh, London, you made it." I nodded. "Of course." She glanced toward the table. "I hope the seating is okay. We tried to arrange everyone according to personalities." Personalities. I forced myself to smile. "I'm sure you did." Ethan arrived shortly afterward with Mason. The moment my grandson saw me, he ran over and hugged me. "I'm sitting next to Dad," he said quietly. "That's wonderful." He frowned. "Why aren't you—" Before I could answer, Savannah appeared beside him. "Mason, sweetheart, go wash your hands before dinner." The boy walked away. She looked at me. "Children notice everything," I answered calmly. "Sometimes adults underestimate them." For a brief second, her smile disappeared. Only for a moment. But I noticed. As more guests arrived, the room became louder. Savannah moved from table to table like a politician. She laughed. She touched people's arms. She complimented dresses. Everyone seemed captivated by her. At dinner, conversations flowed around me. One of Savannah's friends asked Ethan how he had met her. He smiled. "At a charity event." Savannah laughed. He looked completely lost. Everyone chuckled. Then one woman turned toward me. "What was Ethan like as a child?" Before I could answer, Savannah spoke. "Oh, Ethan practically raised himself. He's always been independent." I looked at her. Ethan looked down at his plate. The words hurt. Charles and I had spent our entire lives raising him. Yet somehow our sacrifices had disappeared. A few minutes later, another guest asked where Ethan learned his work ethic. Again, Savannah answered. "He's naturally driven." No mention of Charles. No mention of our years of struggle. No mention of family. It was as if Ethan had appeared fully grown one day. Invisible parents. Invisible history. Invisible mother. The humiliation grew slowly. Small comments, tiny dismissals, little cuts. During dessert, Savannah stood to make a toast. She thanked her bridesmaids. She thanked her friends. She thanked her co-workers. She thanked her wedding planner. Then she turned toward Ethan. "I want to thank the people who truly support our future." Something about those words felt deliberate, as though support only mattered if it benefited her future. She glanced briefly toward me, only briefly, but long enough. After the applause ended, Mason quietly walked over to my chair. He looked upset. "Grandma?" "Yes, sweetheart." "I don't feel good." I touched his forehead. He wasn't sick. "What's wrong?" He lowered his voice. "Savannah got mad at me." "Why?" I asked why you weren't sitting with Dad. My chest tightened. "What did she say?" He swallowed. "She said grown-up decisions aren't my business." I held his hand. "You didn't do anything wrong." He nodded, but his eyes filled with tears. That was when a man entered the room. He appeared to be around 45 years old. Tall, gray suit, dark hair. He stood near the doorway, looking uncomfortable. Several guests turned to look at him. Savannah froze. For the first time all evening, she looked genuinely nervous. The man approached carefully. "Savannah?" Her face lost all color. "Ethan," she said quickly. "This is Daniel." The man nodded politely. "We worked together years ago." Something in his expression suggested otherwise. He looked at Savannah for several seconds. Then he said quietly, "It's been a long time." Savannah forced a smile. "Very long." The atmosphere changed immediately. Even Ethan noticed. "You know each other well." Daniel hesitated. "Not exactly," Savannah interrupted. "We met briefly years ago." But Daniel continued looking at her. His expression was strange. Not anger, not affection, recognition, as if he knew something nobody else did. He eventually took a seat near the opposite end of the room. Throughout dinner, I noticed him watching Savannah. And several times, I noticed Savannah watching him. Neither looked comfortable. Later that evening, I walked toward the restroom. As I passed the hallway, I heard voices. Savannah and Daniel. I stopped. "You shouldn't have come." Daniel answered quietly. "You didn't answer my calls. You need to leave." I thought Ethan deserved to know. My heart began pounding. Savannah's voice became sharper. "That part of my life is over." Daniel replied with words I still remember. "You can change your name, but you can't erase who you are." Silence. I stepped backward before they could see me. My hands were shaking. Change your name. What did that mean? Who was Daniel? And why was Savannah terrified of him? When I returned to the dining room, Savannah had regained her composure. Her smile had returned. Her voice was calm. But something had changed. She seemed angry, especially with Mason. At one point, he accidentally spilled water. She immediately snapped. "Mason, honestly?" The entire table became quiet. Ethan quickly helped him, but the boy looked embarrassed. I reached over. "It's only water." Savannah forced another smile. "Of course." Yet her eyes said something entirely different. The dinner finally ended around 10 o'clock. Guests began leaving. As I gathered my purse, Daniel approached me. He spoke quietly. "You're Ethan's mother." "Yes." He nodded. "You seem like a good woman." "Thank you." He hesitated. Then he looked toward Savannah. "Please, pay attention." My stomach tightened. "To what?" He seemed to reconsider. "It's probably not my place." Before I could ask another question, Savannah walked toward us. Daniel stepped away. He left the restaurant alone. I watched him disappear into the parking lot. Driving home that night, I couldn't stop thinking about him. Change your name. That part of my life is over. Pay attention. 3 separate sentences. 3 warning. When I finally arrived home, I found Mason sitting on my front porch. Ethan had dropped him off because he was spending the weekend with me. The boy looked exhausted. As I unlocked the front door, he suddenly asked, "Grandma?" "Yes." "Why did that man call Savannah by another name?" I froze. "What did you hear?" He looked frightened. "He called her Monica." The cold feeling returned to my chest. Because children hear everything. And for the second time in less than a week, my grandson had noticed something that every adult in the room had ignored. I hardly slept after the rehearsal dinner. Daniel's words kept replaying in my mind. You can change your name, but you can't erase who you are. And then there was Mason. My grandson had heard another name, Monica. I wanted to ask Ethan questions. I wanted to confront Savannah. I wanted to call Daniel. Instead, I did nothing. Because the wedding was less than 24 hours away, and I was terrified of being wrong. Saturday morning arrived gray and cold. October winds moved through the trees outside my house as I dressed for the ceremony. I wore the blue dress Charles had always loved, the same dress I had worn to Ethan's college graduation. As I stood in front of the mirror, I suddenly felt old. Not because of my age, but because I had never felt so powerless. I picked up Charles's wedding ring, which I kept inside a small wooden box. "Help me today," I whispered. Then I left for the church. St. Andrew's was beautiful. White flowers decorated the entrance. Music floated through the sanctuary. Guests laughed and embraced each other. Everything looked exactly like a perfect wedding. Except nothing felt perfect. The usher walked me toward my seat. 4th row. Again. I watched Savannah's family occupy the front rows. Several people I had never met sat where Charles and I would have sat together. Mason was already sitting beside Ethan near the front. When he saw me, his face fell. He wanted to come over. Savannah gently touched his shoulder. The boy remained in his seat. That simple moment hurt more than I expected. For years, Ethan had always looked for me first. Every baseball game, every graduation, every important day. Now I sat behind strangers. A guest beside me smiled. "Are you from Savannah's side?" I forced a smile. "I'm Ethan's mother." Her eyes widened. "Oh." That single word said everything. The church slowly filled. The organ began playing softly. Bridesmaids lined up near the entrance. I noticed Daniel sitting alone near the back, not far from me. He looked uncomfortable, almost as though he regretted being there. He caught my eye briefly, then looked away. Something about him felt sad, not dangerous, not threatening, just sad. The minister walked to the front. The music changed. Everyone stood. Savannah appeared at the entrance. She looked beautiful. No one could deny that. Her dress sparkled beneath the stained glass windows. The guests smiled. Several people cried. Ethan looked overwhelmed. He truly loved her. That was the tragedy. He wasn't pretending. He wasn't using her. He believed every word. As Savannah slowly walked down the aisle, I studied her face. She looked calm, confident, victorious. And suddenly I remembered what she had said at the restaurant. "After the wedding, everything changes." The words returned like ice in my veins. The ceremony began. The minister spoke about love, about trust, about family, about honesty. Each word seemed to hang heavily inside the church, because I no longer knew if honesty existed anywhere in this room. Halfway through the ceremony, I noticed movement. Mason. He was staring toward the side hallway near the bridal dressing room. His face looked pale, very pale. He glanced toward me, then toward the hallway, then back to me. Something was wrong, very wrong. A few minutes later, during one of the readings, Mason quietly stood. Ethan looked surprised. The boy whispered something. Ethan nodded absently. Everyone assumed he needed the restroom. Instead, Mason walked quickly toward the back of the church, toward me. His breathing was uneven. His hands were shaking. He knelt beside my chair. "Grandma," his voice barely existed. "What is it, sweetheart?" He looked over his shoulder. Nobody seemed to notice us. Then he leaned close, so close that I could feel his breath, and he whispered, "Grandma, Savannah isn't really Savannah." The world stopped. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. For several seconds, I heard nothing except my own heartbeat. Because those were the exact words I had feared, not because a child said them, but because I had already begun believing them. I looked at him. "What?" His eyes filled with tears. I saw papers. My hands immediately grabbed his. "What papers?" "In her room." What room? The bridal room. His voice trembled. I got lost. The church seemed to disappear around me. The minister continued speaking. Guests smiled. Music played softly, but all I could hear was Mason. I saw another name. My mouth had gone dry. What name? He looked frightened. I don't remember all of it. His eyes filled with tears. But it wasn't Savannah. I struggled to remain calm. What else did you see? He swallowed. There were papers. What kind of papers? I don't know. He looked over his shoulder again. There was your address. My entire body became cold. My address. He nodded. And Dad's name. For a moment, I thought I might faint. My house. Ethan. Another name. The pieces began moving together inside my mind. Mason, did anyone see you? He nodded slowly. She did. My heart nearly stopped. What happened? She got angry. What did she say? His small voice barely rose above a whisper. She said children should stay out of grown-up business. The exact same words. Again. I looked toward the altar. Savannah stood beside my son. Beautiful, composed, perfect, as if nothing in the world could touch her. And suddenly, I realized something terrifying. She was not worried about me. She was worried about Mason. Because children notice things. Children wander into rooms. Children ask questions. Children tell the truth. I squeezed his hand. Listen to me. He nodded. You did nothing wrong. His eyes filled with tears. I was scared. I know. I didn't know who to tell. My heart broke. A 10-year-old child had been carrying this alone. I looked around the church. Everyone remained focused on the ceremony. Nobody knew. Nobody suspected. And suddenly, I understood something. If I stood up right now, if I screamed, if I stopped the wedding, nobody would believe me. I was an older woman who disliked the bride. Mason was a frightened child. Savannah would deny everything. Ethan would defend her. And I would lose my son forever. The minister asked everyone to bow their heads. People lowered their eyes. I leaned close to Mason. Can you show me? He nodded. After, yes. He took a deep breath. Then he said one final sentence. One sentence that sent another chill through me. Grandma, she said, after today, everything belongs to them. Them. Not Ethan. Them. I looked back toward the altar. For the first time since the ceremony began, Savannah turned and looked directly at me. Our eyes met, and for a brief second, her smile disappeared. As if she somehow knew. As if she understood that something had changed. Because the frightened old woman sitting quietly in the fourth row had finally become afraid for something much bigger than herself. I was afraid for my son, for my grandson, for my family. And as the minister prepared to continue the ceremony, I realized that the most important person in the entire church was not the bride, not the groom, not even me. It was a 10-year-old boy who had finally found the courage to whisper the truth. The ceremony continued. The minister spoke about commitment. The guests smiled. The musicians played softly. And beside me, my grandson sat trembling. I wrapped my arm around Mason and tried to calm him, but my own hands were shaking. Savannah stood only 20 feet away. She looked radiant, perfect, confident. No one in that church would have believed that a frightened 10-year-old and an aging grandmother were quietly unraveling the bride's secrets. The minister finally announced a brief pause before the signing portion of the ceremony. Guests stood. People stretched. Some walked outside. Others headed toward the restrooms. This was my opportunity. I leaned toward Mason. "Can you show me where you went?" He nodded immediately. "I remember." We quietly slipped through the side hallway near the choir room. The church was large, and most guests remained inside the sanctuary. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear my own footsteps. Mason stopped beside a closed door. "The bride's room." The sign still hung outside. Inside, the room was empty. Savannah had already returned to the ceremony. The makeup artists were gone. Flowers sat on the counter. Several garment bags hung against the wall. Everything appeared perfectly normal. Then Mason pointed. "Over there." On a small table near the mirror sat a leather folder. Beside it was a handbag. I hesitated. This was wrong. This was invasion. This was not who I was. But then I remembered my address. I remembered Daniel. I remembered the other name, and I remembered my grandson's terrified face. I slowly opened the folder. Inside were several documents. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Insurance forms, bank information, legal paperwork. Then I saw a name, Monica L. Pierce. I stared. My breathing stopped. Because the last name was not Savannah's, it wasn't even close. I turned another page. Again. Monica Pierce. Another document. Monica Lynn Pierce. My hands began shaking. "Mason." He looked at me. "That's the name." He nodded. "I think so." I carefully continued searching. There were photocopies of identification cards, financial documents. And then I saw something that made my blood turn cold. A printed list. Ethan Harrison. Primary assets. Savings. Retirement account. Life insurance. And below that, London Harrison. Residence value. Estimated equity. Property records. I suddenly felt dizzy. My house. My home. Charles's home. Everything had been listed. Everything had been researched. This wasn't curiosity. This wasn't family planning. This was preparation. Mason quietly asked, "Grandma?" I looked at him. "Did Savannah see you looking at these?" He nodded. "She got mad." "What exactly did she say?" He lowered his eyes. "She said these papers would help all of us later." My heart sank. Children trust adults, even when adults lie. I carefully placed everything exactly as I had found it. As we prepared to leave, another piece of paper slipped from the folder. It fell onto the floor. I picked it up. At the top was a law office name. Below that, property transfer consultation. My fingers tightened around the paper. Before I could read further, footsteps echoed outside. Mason's eyes widened. "Someone's coming." I quickly returned the document. The door opened. Daniel stood there. For several seconds, none of us spoke. He looked at me, then at Mason, then toward the folder. "I figured someone would come looking." My heart raced. "Who are you?" He sighed. "My name is Daniel Pierce." The last name hit me immediately. Pierce. The same name. He looked toward the documents. "I suppose you've seen it." I struggled to speak. "Monica Pierce." He nodded slowly. "That was her name." "Was..." His face filled with sadness. "My wife." The room became silent. Mason moved closer to me. I could barely breathe. What are you saying? Daniel looked exhausted. We were married. When? 8 years ago? I stared at him. But Savannah said her name wasn't Savannah. My entire body became cold. He sat down heavily in a chair. I don't know what name she's using now. There have been others. Others? He nodded. Monica, Sarah, Vanessa once. I felt the room spinning. Why are you here? His eyes filled with regret. Because I recognized Ethan's picture online. What do you mean? I saw their engagement announcement. His voice broke slightly. And I knew. Mason squeezed my hand. Daniel looked at him kindly. You were very brave. The boy didn't answer. I finally asked the question I feared most. Is she dangerous? He thought carefully. She doesn't hurt people physically. Then what? She studies people? His words sounded familiar, because that was exactly what I had felt, measuring, evaluating, calculating. Daniel continued. She looks for lonely people, people who want love, families with money, people who trust easily. I sat down, because my legs no longer worked. Ethan loves her. I know. Does she love him? Daniel looked away. His silence answered everything. After several moments, he spoke again. I tried warning her previous fiancé. There was another man. He nodded. He lost nearly everything. My heart pounded. What exactly does she do? He looked uncomfortable. I don't have proof of crimes, but she gets access to money, to assets, to property. He nodded, and eventually relationships collapse. I suddenly remembered the list. My house, my savings, our property, everything documented, everything organized. Mason quietly asked, Is my dad okay? Daniel looked at him. I hope so. The innocence in that answer broke my heart. My grandson was 10 years old. He should have been eating wedding cake, taking pictures, celebrating his father. Instead, he was standing in a church discussing fraud and deception. I finally looked at Daniel. Why didn't you tell Ethan? He smiled sadly. Would he believe me? I knew the answer. No, he wouldn't. He loved her, and love can make intelligent people blind. A voice suddenly echoed from the hallway. London. Rebecca. No, not Rebecca. It was one of the bridesmaids. Everyone is returning. Daniel stood. You should go. I looked at him. What should I do? He hesitated. Don't accuse her today. Why? Because she'll deny everything. I looked toward the folder. The papers? She'll explain them. The name? She'll explain that too. His eyes met mine. But if she's planning something after the ceremony, she'll eventually show her hand. Those words frightened me, because it meant the danger wasn't over. It was only beginning. Mason reached for my hand. Grandma. I looked down. I'm scared. I knelt beside him. So am I. He whispered, What do we do? I looked toward the sanctuary. The music had begun again. The guests were returning. Ethan was waiting. Savannah was waiting. And somewhere inside that church, my family stood on the edge of something none of them could see. I kissed Mason's forehead. We stay together. As we walked back toward the ceremony, I realized something terrifying. The wedding itself was not the danger. The wedding was only the beginning. And for the first time since Charles died, I desperately wished my husband were standing beside me. Because I had no idea how I was supposed to save my son. When Mason and I returned to the sanctuary, nobody seemed to notice that we had been gone. The ceremony continued. The minister spoke about devotion. The guests smiled. The photographer moved quietly between the pews. And standing at the altar, my son looked happier than I had seen him in years. That was what hurt the most. Ethan wasn't making a mistake because he was selfish. He was making a mistake because he wanted to be loved. I sat beside Mason and tried to control my breathing. Daniel's words repeated inside my head. She studies people. She looks for lonely families. She gains access. And then there were the documents. My house, my savings, Charles's property. Everything carefully listed. Everything prepared. Mason leaned against me. Grandma. Yes. What are we going to do? I looked at the altar. I don't know yet. That answer frightened me. Because mothers are supposed to know. Grandmothers are supposed to know. But I had never faced anything like this. The ceremony ended 20 minutes later. Everyone stood and applauded. Savannah and Ethan kissed. The church filled with cheers. Photographers rushed forward. Guests gathered around the couple. For a brief moment, I thought about walking directly to Ethan, telling him everything, showing him the documents, telling him about Daniel, about Monica, about the other names. But then I looked at his face. He looked happier than he had in years, and I knew exactly what would happen. He would defend her. He would believe her, and I would lose him. Mason tugged gently on my sleeve. Grandma, she's looking at us. I turned. Savannah stood near the altar. Her smile remained in place, but her eyes were different, sharp, watchful. For the first time, I realized she knew something had changed. Perhaps she had seen Mason leave. Perhaps she had noticed us disappear. Perhaps she already suspected. The reception was held at an exclusive country club 30 minutes away. I drove separately. Mason rode with Ethan. During the drive, I called only one person, Rebecca Collins. Rebecca had been our attorney for nearly 30 years. She had helped Charles create his business documents. She had handled his estate after his death. She was also one of my closest friends. She answered immediately. London. My voice shook. I need your help. She became serious. What happened? I can't explain everything over the phone. Are you safe? Yes. What about Ethan? I don't know. There was a pause. Tell me the important part. I took a deep breath. The woman Ethan married may not be who she says she is. Rebecca was silent. Then she said, Where are you? Driving to the reception. Tell me everything. For 20 minutes, I explained Daniel, Monica Pierce, the documents, my property, the list, the law office. When I finished, Rebecca spoke carefully. Did you take any papers? No. Pictures? No. She sighed. That's unfortunate. I know. But you have a witness. Daniel. And Mason. I looked through the windshield. Mason is only 10. Children can still tell the truth. I swallowed. What should I do? Rebecca hesitated. Do not accuse anyone publicly. Daniel had said the same thing. Why? Because without evidence, you'll become the jealous mother who ruined the wedding. The words hurt because they were true. Can you investigate? Possibly. How long? I don't know. I looked at the clock. The reception had already begun. I don't think we have much time. Rebecca became quiet. Then she asked a question. Did Charles ever discuss the trust? My hands tightened around the steering wheel. The trust. After his illness, my heart skipped. No, he never told you. I thought about the letter. Trust your instincts. Protect yourself. No. Rebecca sounded surprised. I assumed he had. What trust? I'd rather explain in person. The anxiety inside me grew stronger. Rebecca, what aren't you telling me? She exhaled. Charles was very careful. About what? Your future. The line became quiet. He worried about exactly this kind of situation. I nearly missed my exit. What do you mean? We'll talk tonight. Tonight. The word echoed inside me, because somehow the wedding was no longer the biggest problem. There was something else, something Charles had done before he died, and I knew nothing about it. When I arrived at the country club, the parking lot was full. Luxury cars lined the entrance. White lights decorated the garden. Music played from inside. Everything looked beautiful. Yet I felt as if I were walking into danger. The ballroom sparkled. Crystal chandeliers, fresh flowers, champagne glasses. Savannah stood near the entrance greeting guests. When she saw me, she walked directly toward me. London. Her smile was perfect. You disappeared after the ceremony. I forced myself to remain calm. I needed some air. Her eyes studied my face. Are you feeling well? Fine. She touched my arm. If today has been overwhelming, I understand. The concern in her voice sounded almost genuine. Almost. Then she looked down. Mason seems upset. I felt my chest tighten. He's tired. He was in my dressing room earlier. There it was, the warning, the test. I looked directly at her. He got lost. Her smile never changed. Children can get into things they don't understand. The exact same sentence. Again. I answered quietly. Sometimes they understand more than adults. For the first time, Savannah's eyes became cold, only for a second. Then Ethan approached. He wrapped his arm around her. Mom, are you enjoying yourself? I looked at my son. His smile, his happiness, his complete trust. And I realized that I was standing between two terrible choices. Tell him the truth and risk losing him forever, or remain silent and risk losing him anyway. As dinner began, guests found their seats. Once again, I sat far from Ethan, far from Mason, far from the head table. I noticed Daniel sitting alone near the back. He avoided Savannah completely. Several times I caught him watching her. Several times I caught her watching him. Both seemed to be waiting for what I didn't know. Halfway through dinner, my phone vibrated. Rebecca. I answered quietly. London. Yes. I found something. My heart stopped. What? The name Monica Pierce. I couldn't breathe. What about it? Rebecca's voice lowered. She isn't just using another name. The room around me disappeared. What are you saying? Rebecca answered softly. London, I think your daughter-in-law may already be married. I sat frozen in my chair. The music continued. Guests laughed. Champagne glasses clinked around the ballroom, yet all I could hear were Rebecca's words. I think your daughter-in-law may already be married. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Rebecca, I'm still checking records, she said quietly. But Daniel Pierce and Monica Pierce appear connected. My hands trembled. Are they divorced? I can't confirm that yet. What should I do? Rebecca lowered her voice. Do nothing publicly. Again, the same advice. Daniel, Rebecca, both telling me to wait, but every minute felt dangerous. I looked toward the head table. Savannah sat beside Ethan, smiling for photographs. She laughed. She touched his hand. She leaned against his shoulder. Anyone watching would have seen a woman deeply in love. Only a few people in the entire room knew something was wrong. Daniel, Rebecca, my grandson, and me. After ending the call, I tried to compose myself. A waiter placed dinner in front of me. I barely touched it. Across the room, Mason kept looking toward me. He looked frightened, lost. I hated that. Children should feel safe at weddings, not terrified. Several guests began giving speeches. Savannah's maid of honor spoke first. She described Savannah as generous, kind, and loyal. Then one of Savannah's co-workers spoke. He called her the most organized woman I know. Organized. The word sent a chill through me, because I had seen the folders, the documents, the lists, very organized. Then Ethan stood. The room immediately became quiet. He looked at Savannah with complete love. I never believed I would find happiness again. My heart broke, because he meant every word. After my divorce, I thought my life was over. Savannah squeezed his hand. You taught me how to trust again. Several guests wiped away tears. Even I felt emotional. Not because of Savannah, because of Ethan. He was sincere. He believed he had finally found peace. And I was sitting there, holding terrible secrets. He continued. You accepted Mason. At those words, I saw my grandson lower his head, because even he knew that wasn't true. You made me believe in family again. My eyes filled with tears. Because the family sitting in that room was already breaking apart. After the applause ended, Savannah stood. She raised her champagne glass. I've waited a very long time for this moment. Her voice was calm, beautiful, controlled. When you finally find your future, you hold on to it. Future. Again. Everything she said revolved around the future. Possession, security, plans. Never love, never family, never memories. As she spoke, I noticed Daniel sitting alone near the back. He never touched his dinner. His eyes never left Savannah. He looked like a man attending a funeral instead of a wedding. Halfway through Savannah's speech, Mason quietly appeared beside me. Grandma? I looked up. Yes. I found something. My heart immediately raced. What? He carefully opened his small suit jacket. Inside was a folded piece of paper. My voice dropped. Where did you get that? In her room. My blood ran cold. When? Earlier. I stared at him. Mason, why didn't you tell me? He looked ashamed. I forgot. I carefully unfolded the paper beneath the table. At first, it appeared to be notes, several addresses, several numbers. Then I saw names. Ethan Harrison, London Harrison, estimated property value, retirement assets, insurance, bank. I stopped breathing. Everything had been listed. Not memories, not family information, assets, money, property. And beside my name, someone had written house transfer options. I nearly dropped the paper. Mason looked terrified. Is it bad? I folded it immediately. No one sees this. Okay. He swallowed. Did I do something wrong? I reached for his hand. No. His eyes filled with tears. I didn't want Dad to get hurt. My heart shattered, because that was exactly what this little boy had been trying to do all along. Protect his father. Not cause trouble. Not ruin a wedding. Simply protect his family. I hugged him tightly. Across the ballroom, Savannah was still speaking. And I look forward to building our future together. Future. Again. When she returned to her seat, dinner continued. The photographer gathered family members. Parents of the groom. I stood. For the first time all evening, I would finally stand beside my son. As I approached the stage, Savannah adjusted everyone's positions. Her mother beside Ethan, her father beside Savannah. Bridesmaids. Groomsmen. Finally, she looked at me. You can stand over there. Over there. At the edge. Again. The photographer hesitated. Is this Ethan's mother? Yes, Savannah answered. Perfect. But she still placed me near the end, not beside my son, not beside my grandson. At that moment, something changed inside me. Not anger, not hatred, clarity. I suddenly understood. This had never been personal. Savannah wasn't competing with me because she disliked me. She was removing me, gradually, politely, carefully, every seat, every conversation, every family decision, one step at a time. She wasn't simply marrying Ethan. She was replacing his family. After photographs ended, Ethan approached me. You okay, Mom? I looked into his eyes. He looked tired, happy, confused, all at the same time. Are you happy? I asked. He smiled. I really am. My throat tightened. Because what could I say? Your wife may already be married. Your son is frightened. Your mother's house is on a list. No, not yet. Instead, I touched his face. The same face I had kissed when he was a little boy. The same face Charles had been so proud of. I love you. He smiled. I love you too. Then Savannah called him, and he walked away. Again. A few minutes later, I stepped outside for air. The evening had become cold. The stars were visible. I heard footsteps behind me. Daniel. He stood beside me. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, he asked, Did she tell him to sign anything yet? I looked at him. What? He nodded toward the ballroom. She usually waits until people are emotional. My entire body went cold. What are you talking about? He looked directly at me. Documents. What documents? Financial papers. I remembered the law office, the transfer papers, the lists. When? Soon. He looked toward the ballroom. That's why she wanted the reception. At that exact moment, the ballroom doors opened. Savannah appeared. She smiled beautifully. Everyone, she announced, I have one more surprise for my husband. The entire room applauded. Several guests stood. Champagne was poured. A small table was brought to the center of the dance floor. And sitting on top of it was a leather folder. the same kind I had seen in the bridal room. Daniel looked at me. His face turned pale, because both of us knew. The real wedding had not happened in the church. It was about to happen right there. The ballroom grew quiet. Every guest turned toward Savannah. The leather folder sat on the small table in the center of the dance floor. Candles flickered. Champagne glasses sparkled. Soft piano music played in the background. If someone had walked into the room at that moment, they would have believed they were witnessing one final romantic surprise. Only 3 people understood that something far more dangerous might be happening. Daniel, Mason, and me. Savannah smiled at Ethan. I wanted to give my husband one final wedding gift. Applause filled the room. Ethan laughed. You've already done enough. She touched his hand. This is about our future. Again, future, always future. Never love, never family. The photographer moved closer. Guests pulled out their phones. Savannah opened the folder. Inside were several documents. My heart began pounding. Daniel remained near the back wall. His face had turned pale. I could barely breathe. Savannah looked at Ethan. You know how important security is to me. He nodded. You know how much I believe in building a stable life. More smiles, more applause. She removed a pen. This simply protects us. Protect us. I remembered Daniel's warning. She usually waits until people are emotional. She looked around the room. I wanted our family to witness this commitment. Family. The word sounded almost cruel, because half the family didn't know what they were witnessing. Ethan looked slightly confused. What is it? She smiled softly. Just some financial agreements. Several guests laughed. One man joked, already. The room laughed with him. Savannah laughed too. It's nothing complicated. Nothing complicated. I felt Mason move closer to me. His hand slipped into mine. Grandma. Yes. I don't like this. Neither did I. Ethan glanced at the papers. Shouldn't I read them later? Savannah touched his arm. It's only paperwork. Only paperwork. Those words sent chills through me. Charles had spent his entire life teaching Ethan never to sign anything without reading it. I suddenly heard his voice inside my head. Never sign when people are watching. Never sign when people are rushing you. Never sign because you're embarrassed to say no. Ethan accepted the pen. My heart stopped. Daniel began walking toward the center of the room. Slowly, carefully. Savannah noticed him. For the first time all evening, her confidence disappeared. Only slightly, but enough. She quickly turned back to Ethan. Go ahead. The pen hovered above the paper. I looked at my son. He looked uncertain, confused, but surrounded. Everyone was watching. Everyone was smiling. And that is when my phone rang. Rebecca. I answered immediately. London. Her voice was urgent. I found the records. My body froze. What records? The marriage records. I could barely speak. Rebecca. Monica Lynn Pierce married Daniel Pierce 8 years ago. I closed my eyes. Oh my God. I found no finalized divorce. The world became silent. What does that mean? Rebecca answered carefully. It means she may still be legally married. My hand shook violently. Across the room, Ethan lowered the pen. Savannah whispered something to him. Rebecca continued. London, where are you? At the reception. Do not let him sign anything. My heart pounded. What if I'm wrong? You aren't. I looked toward Ethan. The pen rose again. Rebecca spoke one final sentence. I'm coming. The call ended. I stood. My knees trembled. Every person in the ballroom still watched the bride and groom. No one noticed me. Not yet. Daniel stopped several feet away. Savannah saw him. Their eyes met. Fear. For the first time, I saw genuine fear. She spoke quickly. "Ethan, please." The pen moved closer to the paper. My son looked uncertain. "Shouldn't my lawyer?" "It isn't necessary." Those words changed everything. Because no honest document fears a lawyer. I heard Charles again. "Never sign anything you don't understand." I stood completely. Mason looked up. "Grandma?" My voice barely came out. "Ethan?" The entire room turned. My son looked surprised. "Mom!" Every eye in the ballroom suddenly rested on me. My heart hammered. Savannah remained perfectly still. I looked at Ethan. "Please don't sign anything tonight." Silence. Total silence. One guest coughed, another lowered her glass. Ethan looked confused. "What?" "Please." Savannah smiled politely. "London, it's only paperwork." I looked directly at her. "Then it can wait until tomorrow." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Ethan looked uncomfortable. "Mom," Savannah interrupted gently. "These are financial protections." I answered quietly. "Then lawyers can review them." A few guests exchanged glances. Daniel remained silent, watching, waiting. Savannah's smile became tighter. "Ethan understands everything." I looked at my son. "Do you—" He hesitated. The hesitation lasted only seconds, but it was enough. Because for the first time all evening, Ethan looked uncertain. "What exactly is it?" he asked. Savannah answered immediately. "Marriage planning." Specifically, she paused, only briefly. But I noticed. Everyone noticed. Then she laughed softly. "This isn't really the time." Exactly, because she had chosen the time. A wedding, champagne, applause, pressure, emotion, the perfect moment. Daniel finally spoke. "I think his mother is right." The room turned toward him. Savannah's face went white. Ethan looked confused. "Daniel." He walked closer. "Maybe tomorrow." Savannah's voice sharpened. "This isn't your business." His answer came calmly. "I think it is." Nobody understood. Not yet. But everyone felt something changing. Mason squeezed my hand. I could feel him shaking. Ethan looked from me to Daniel. "What is happening?" No one answered. Because nobody wanted to destroy him. Not me. Not Daniel. Not even Rebecca. We wanted him to reach the truth himself. Savannah stepped closer to Ethan. "Your mother never accepted me." There it was. The first weapon. The jealous mother. The controlling parent. The difficult woman. Ethan looked torn. "Mom," I fought back tears. "This isn't about me." "Then what is it?" I couldn't answer. Not yet. Because Rebecca was still coming. Because the records were still on her phone. Because accusations without proof would still destroy everything. The ballroom remained silent. Guests no longer smiled. The music had stopped. Even the photographer had lowered his camera. Savannah picked up the documents. "If people are uncomfortable, we can do this privately." Daniel immediately said, "That's probably best." She looked at him. Pure hatred flashed across her face. Only for a second, but I saw it, and I knew This man wasn't lying. He knew her, really knew her. Ethan finally put the pen down. Relief flooded through me. Not victory, just relief. Because at least my son had not signed. Not tonight. Savannah forced another smile. Everyone, please enjoy dessert. The guests slowly began talking again. The spell had broken. The perfect evening had cracked. Nothing dramatic had happened. No screaming, no accusations, no scandal. But something far more dangerous had occurred. Doubt. For the first time since meeting Savannah, my son looked uncertain. And for the first time since entering the ballroom, Savannah looked afraid. 20 minutes later, as coffee was served, the ballroom doors opened. Rebecca Collins walked inside carrying her briefcase. She looked directly at me, then at Daniel, then at Savannah. Savannah's face lost every remaining trace of color because she recognized Rebecca immediately. And in that moment, I understood something terrifying. They had met before. The moment Rebecca Collins stepped into the ballroom, Savannah stopped breathing. It lasted only a second. Most people never noticed. But I did. Daniel did. And Rebecca certainly did. Rebecca had been practicing law for more than 35 years. She had represented my husband, handled Charles's estate, and protected our family through some of the hardest moments of our lives. She was not easily intimidated. She walked directly toward me. London. I stood. Thank you for coming. Her eyes moved briefly toward Savannah, then toward Daniel. Recognition flashed across her face. She knew him, or at least knew his story. Savannah recovered quickly. She forced a smile. Who is this? Rebecca calmly extended her hand. Rebecca Collins, family attorney. The word attorney changed everything. The room suddenly became quiet again. Ethan looked confused. Mom? I looked at him. Rebecca has represented our family for many years. Savannah's smile grew tighter. This seems unnecessary, Rebecca answered politely. Perhaps. Then she looked at Ethan. But before anyone signs legal documents at a wedding reception, I would consider it very necessary. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable looks. Savannah immediately picked up the leather folder. They're simply financial agreements, Rebecca smiled. Wonderful. Then there should be no problem reviewing them. Savannah didn't answer. That silence spoke louder than any argument. Ethan looked at his wife. Savannah, she touched his arm. Your mother doesn't trust me. I felt pain in my chest. Because she had turned the conversation exactly where I feared. The difficult mother, the jealous woman, the interfering parent. Ethan looked exhausted. Mom, what's happening? I wanted to answer, but Rebecca spoke first. Ethan, I have a question. He nodded. Do you know your wife's legal name? The room became completely silent. Savannah immediately answered. Of course he does. Rebecca never looked at her. She looked only at Ethan. Do you? He hesitated. Savannah Pierce. Rebecca slowly opened her briefcase. I found several legal records this evening. Savannah's voice became sharp. You had no right. Rebecca ignored her. She removed several documents. Monica Lynn Pierce. Ethan frowned. What? Rebecca placed the papers on the table. Monica Lynn Pierce. Savannah's face lost color. Daniel finally stepped forward. That was her name. Every person in the ballroom turned toward him. Savannah looked furious. You need to leave. Daniel ignored her. He looked directly at Ethan. My name is Daniel Pierce. Ethan stared at him. What does that mean? Daniel took a breath. I was married to her. The room exploded. Gasps, whispers, people turning toward one another. Someone dropped a glass. Ethan simply stood there, frozen. No. Daniel nodded slowly. Yes. Savannah finally raised her voice. He's lying. Rebecca immediately answered. The marriage records exist. He was abusive. Daniel shook his head. No. You ruined my life. His voice remained calm. You took my savings. Several guests looked shocked. Ethan turned toward Savannah. Tell me this isn't true. She stepped closer. Ethan, please. Tell me. Her eyes filled with tears. For the first time all evening, she appeared vulnerable, but something about it felt practiced, almost perfect. She looked directly at me. This is what you wanted. My heart broke, because Ethan still didn't know whom to believe. He looked at Rebecca. What exactly are you saying? Rebecca carefully chose her words. I'm saying that Monica Lynn Pierce legally married Daniel Pierce. Ethan's voice shook. And divorced him. Rebecca hesitated. The entire room waited. I found no finalized divorce records. The silence afterward felt endless. Savannah looked terrified. No. Rebecca opened another document. The records are incomplete, but as of this afternoon, I could not locate a legal dissolution. Daniel quietly added, We separated. Ethan stared. You mean? Nobody wanted to say it. Finally, Rebecca spoke. If the marriage still exists, today's ceremony may not be legally valid. Several guests covered their mouths. One of Savannah's bridesmaids began crying. The wedding planner sat down. Everything that had looked perfect 1 hour earlier was collapsing. Savannah suddenly turned toward Daniel. You did this. He answered softly. No, you did. Mason had moved beside me. His hand held mine tightly. The poor boy looked frightened. I bent down. It's okay. But I wasn't sure that it was. Ethan looked completely lost. He sat down in his chair. He looked at Savannah, at Daniel, at Rebecca, at me. His entire world had begun falling apart. Finally, he asked the question that mattered most. Who are you? Savannah began crying. My name was Monica. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. You lied. She shook her head. I changed my life. Rebecca spoke carefully. Changing your life is not illegal. Daniel answered. Changing husbands might be. Several guests gasped. Savannah looked furious. I left because you controlled me. Daniel remained calm. Then why use another name? No answer. Why hide our marriage? No answer. Why collect financial information? Still no answer. Ethan looked at the leather folder. What's in those papers? Savannah immediately reached for it. Rebecca spoke firmly. Perhaps Ethan should read them. Slowly, very slowly, Ethan opened the folder. The first few pages meant nothing to him. Then his expression changed. He kept turning pages. His breathing became heavier. Finally, he looked up. Why is my mother's house listed? Nobody answered. Why are her savings listed? Silence. Why is my life insurance policy here? Savannah stepped forward. I was planning our future. Ethan stood. My mother's house. His voice cracked. My mother's retirement. I wanted us to be secure. The entire room listened. He held up the papers. House transfer options. His eyes filled with tears. What is this? Savannah began crying again. You don't understand. He looked devastated. Then explain it. For the first time all evening, she had no answer, because there was no explanation, not one that love could justify, not one that family could understand. Mason suddenly spoke. His small voice cut through the room. I saw the papers. Everyone turned. The boy trembled. I saw them in the church. Savannah closed her eyes. Mason looked at his father. She got mad at me. Ethan stared at his son. What? Tears rolled down Mason's face. She said I shouldn't tell. The room became silent again, because children do not perform. Children do not calculate. Children simply tell the truth. And in that moment, I believe Ethan finally understood. Not because of Rebecca, not because of Daniel, not because of me, because of his son, his own child. He slowly lowered the papers. Then he looked at Savannah, or Monica, or whatever her name truly was. His voice barely existed. Did you ever love me? She opened her mouth, but no words came, and that silence answered everything. The question hung in the air. Did you ever love me? Ethan stood in the center of the ballroom, still holding the papers in his trembling hands. Savannah looked at him. Daniel looked at her. Rebecca remained perfectly still. And my grandson stood beside me, gripping my hand as tightly as he could. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke, because everyone understood that the answer would change everything. Finally, Savannah lowered her eyes. I loved you in my own way. The words struck Ethan like a physical blow. He shook his head. In your own way? Tears rolled down her cheeks. You don't understand what I've been through. Daniel quietly answered, Neither do you. She turned toward him immediately. You ruined my life. He remained calm. No, I trusted you. The guests watched in complete silence. A wedding that had begun with music and flowers had turned into something entirely different. Truth, pain, and the slow collapse of an illusion. Ethan looked at Daniel. Were you really married? Daniel nodded. Yes. When? 8 years ago. Why didn't you divorce? Daniel hesitated. Because she disappeared. Savannah immediately shook her head. That's a lie. Daniel reached into his jacket and removed a worn envelope. I brought this because I hoped I wouldn't need it. He handed it to Rebecca. She opened it carefully. Inside were photographs, marriage certificates, letters, legal notices. Rebecca studied them quietly. Then she looked up. The marriage certificate appears authentic. Several guests gasped again. Savannah's bridesmaids looked completely stunned. One of them quietly sat down and began crying. Ethan stared at the documents. This can't be real. Savannah stepped toward him. Ethan, please listen to me. But he moved away. For the first time all evening, he stepped away from her. And I think that hurt her more than anything, because she had spent months drawing him closer, and now he was finally seeing her from a distance. Rebecca spoke carefully. Even if the legal situation is incomplete, there are serious questions here. Ethan looked exhausted. What kind of questions? She pointed toward the papers. These financial documents. He looked down. My mother's house. Rebecca nodded. Your mother's property. My insurance. Yes. My retirement account. Yes. His voice cracked. Why? Savannah's tears returned. I wanted us to have security. Ethan shook his head. My mother's home isn't our security. Nobody spoke, because he was finally saying the things I had been unable to say. He looked at me. For the first time that evening, he truly looked at me. Not as the difficult mother, not as the woman who disliked his fiancée, but as his mother. The woman who had raised him. The woman who had sacrificed for him. The woman sitting alone in the 4th row. And I saw something break inside him. Mason suddenly stepped forward. Dad! The room became quiet again. Ethan looked down at his son. What is it, buddy? Mason's voice trembled. I heard her. Savannah closed her eyes. Ethan looked confused. What do you mean? The boy swallowed. I heard her talking. When? At the house. My heart broke for him. Because he was only 10, he should never have carried this burden. He looked at his father. She said after the wedding, everything would belong to you both. The room remained silent. Mason continued. She asked about Grandma's house. His voice became smaller. And Grandpa's papers. Ethan stared at Savannah. She said nothing. Mason wiped tears from his eyes. And she got mad when I saw the papers. I knelt beside him. You don't have to do this. But he looked at his father. I don't want you to get hurt. Several people began crying. Because there was no performance in his words. Only love. Only fear. Only truth. Ethan covered his mouth. His son had tried to protect him, while he himself had ignored every warning. Savannah suddenly turned toward the exit. I can't do this. Daniel spoke, running again. She stopped. Rebecca looked up. Before you leave, there is one more issue. Everyone turned. Rebecca removed another document. This afternoon, I spoke with the county clerk. Savannah became pale. There is no finalized divorce record. Daniel lowered his eyes. The room became perfectly silent. Rebecca continued. As of today, there is no evidence that your marriage to Daniel Pierce was legally dissolved. Ethan whispered, What does that mean? Nobody wanted to answer. Finally, Rebecca said it. It means today's marriage may not be legally valid. The words shattered the room. One guest cried out softly. The wedding planner covered her face. Someone began gathering decorations, because suddenly, the reception no longer belonged to a bride and groom. It belonged to a disaster. Savannah looked at Daniel. You wanted revenge. He answered quietly. No. He looked at Ethan. I wanted him to have a choice. Those words hit me deeply, because that was all any of us wanted. A choice, one based on truth, not deception. Savannah suddenly grabbed her purse. I'm leaving. Ethan looked up. Wait. She stopped. His voice shook. Tell me the truth. She stood perfectly still. Just once. Tears rolled down his face. Were you planning to have me sign those papers? She didn't answer. Were you planning to use my mother's house? Still silence. Were you planning to put her in a care facility? My entire body froze. The room went silent. Even Rebecca looked surprised. Savannah slowly looked away, and that was enough, because no denial came, no outrage, no explanation, only silence. Ethan sat down heavily. He looked completely destroyed. The woman he loved, the future he imagined, the wedding, the promises, everything was collapsing. Savannah finally walked toward the exit. No one stopped her. No one followed. Halfway to the door, she turned. Her eyes met mine. There was anger, fear, and something else. Defeat. Then she left. The doors closed behind her. The room remained completely silent. For several seconds, nobody moved. And then Ethan began crying. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, like a little boy. Like the little boy I once held after nightmares. He covered his face. I didn't see it. My heart broke because I had never seen my son look so lost. I walked toward him, slowly, carefully. He looked up. His eyes were full of pain. Mom. Just one word. The same word he used as a child. And suddenly, none of the anger mattered, none of the humiliation, none of the fourth-row seats, because my son was sitting in front of me completely broken, and I was still his mother. The ballroom slowly emptied. Some guests left quietly. Others gathered in small groups whispering. Several of Savannah's friends disappeared without saying goodbye. The wedding band packed their instruments. The photographer lowered his camera. The beautiful reception that had cost thousands of dollars now felt like the aftermath of a storm, and in the center of it all sat my son, broken, completely broken. I sat beside Ethan. Neither of us spoke. Mason leaned against his father. The boy looked exhausted. Rebecca quietly reviewed documents at a nearby table, while Daniel remained near the windows, giving everyone space. Finally, Ethan spoke. How long? No one answered. He looked at Rebecca. How long did Mom know? I swallowed. Not very long. He looked at me. Why didn't you tell me? The question hurt, because I had asked myself the same thing. I was afraid. Of what? Losing you. His eyes filled with tears. You almost did. I nodded. I know. He looked down at his hands. For months, I thought you hated her. My voice trembled. I wanted to love her. And that was the truth. I had wanted Savannah to become family. I had wanted Ethan to be happy. I had wanted Mason to have stability. But something inside me had continued whispering that something was wrong. And Charles had been right. Trust your instincts. Ethan suddenly looked toward Rebecca. What about the trust? The room became quiet. Rebecca removed another folder from her briefcase. For the first time all evening, I remembered our phone conversation. Charles, the trust. The thing he had apparently arranged before his death. Rebecca looked at me. I believe it's time. I frowned. What are you talking about? She opened the folder. Charles established the Harrison Family Trust 6 months before he died. I stared at her. He never told me. He asked me not to. My heart skipped. Why? Rebecca's expression softened. Because he worried you would eventually give away too much. I felt tears forming. Charles knew me too well. I had always put everyone else first. Ethan looked confused. What trust? Rebecca continued. The house belongs to the trust. I blinked. My house? She nodded. The property cannot be sold, transferred, borrowed against, or moved without London's approval. I could barely breathe. Rebecca looked at Ethan. After London's lifetime ownership passes equally to you and Mason. Mason looked surprised. Me, Rebecca smiled. Yes. My eyes filled with tears. Charles had protected us, even after death, even after all these years. Ethan sat quietly. So none of those papers mattered. Rebecca shook her head. No. What about Mom's money? Most major assets are protected. Relief flooded through me, because suddenly I understood something. Charles had seen the future better than any of us. He had worried about loneliness. He had worried about pressure. He had worried about exactly this situation. And he had quietly protected our family. Ethan covered his eyes. Dad knew. Rebecca nodded. He worried people might take advantage of you someday. That sentence hurt Ethan deeply, because he realized what had happened, not because he was foolish, because he was lonely. After his divorce, after years of raising Mason alone, after losing his father, he had wanted love, and someone had used that need against him. Daniel finally walked toward us. I should go. Ethan looked up. No. Daniel stopped. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Finally, Ethan asked, Did she do this to you? Daniel nodded. Most of it. What happened? Daniel sat down. We met 5 years after my divorce. His voice was calm. She was wonderful. I could hear the pain underneath the words. She listened. He smiled sadly. She made me feel important. Ethan lowered his eyes. Because he understood. Daniel continued. Eventually, she wanted access to finances. Did you give it to her? Some. What happened? Daniel looked toward the empty dance floor. I started asking questions. He paused. Then she disappeared. The room became silent. With money. He nodded. Not all of it. Why didn't you report her? He looked tired. Because proving emotional fraud is difficult. Rebecca quietly agreed. And because many victims feel embarrassed. Ethan looked devastated. He had become another victim, another lonely man, another broken heart. Mason suddenly climbed onto his father's lap. Dad. Ethan wrapped his arms around him. The little boy whispered, I tried to tell you. And that was when my son finally began crying. Not because of Savannah, not because of the wedding, because his son had carried this fear alone. I'm sorry, buddy. Mason cried too. I didn't want you to be sad. Ethan kissed his forehead. You saved me. The room became quiet again. I looked at my grandson, the same boy who had whispered in the church, the same boy who had noticed what adults ignored, the same boy who had chosen truth over comfort. And I realized that the entire family had been saved by a child. A little later, Rebecca approached me privately. London. Yes, I have something else. My heart sank. What? She handed me a sealed envelope. Charles's handwriting, again, for London. I stared. There are 2. Rebecca nodded. He asked me to give this to you only if you truly needed it. My hands trembled. Why now? She smiled gently. Because I think he knew there would come a day when you doubted yourself. I opened it carefully. Inside was a short letter. My dear London, if you're reading this, then your heart is probably hurting. Please remember this. Love should never make you smaller. Family should never push you aside. And if our son ever loses his way, help him home. Not because he deserves punishment, because he deserves grace. Trust the people who protect children. Trust your instincts. And never believe that growing older makes you less important. You have always been the heart of this family. I love you, Charles. I couldn't stop crying because somehow my husband had still been protecting us, even now, even after death. Later that evening, the ballroom was almost empty. Savannah never returned. Her phone had been turned off. Several guests had already gone home. The wedding cake remained untouched. The flowers still stood beautifully on every table. Everything looked exactly as it had hours earlier. Yet nothing remained the same. Ethan finally stood. He looked at me. Mom. Yes. He hesitated. Then he asked the question I never expected. Can Mason and I come home? And for the first time that entire terrible day, I felt something other than fear. Hope. When Ethan asked if he and Mason could come home, I almost started crying again. Home. Not his apartment. Not the country club. Not the ruined wedding reception. Home. The same house where he had learned to ride a bicycle. The same kitchen where Charles had taught him to make pancakes. The same porch where we had spent countless summer evenings together. I looked at him. He suddenly seemed much younger. Not 42. Not a man standing at the edge of a second failed relationship. Just my son. The little boy who used to crawl into our bed after nightmares. Of course, I told him. His shoulders finally relaxed. Mason smiled for the first time that entire day. The three of us left the ballroom shortly after midnight. Rebecca promised she would continue investigating the legal records. Daniel quietly shook Ethan's hand before leaving. I truly am sorry. Ethan looked exhausted. I believe you. Daniel nodded. Then he walked into the darkness alone. I felt sorry for him. Years earlier, nobody had believed him either. The drive home was quiet. Mason had fallen asleep against the car window. Ethan stared outside. The lights of Columbus passed silently around us. Finally, he spoke. I almost signed those papers. I kept my eyes on the road. But you didn't. Because of you. No. I looked at him briefly. Because of Mason. He lowered his eyes. My own son was trying to protect me. His voice cracked. And I didn't listen. Nobody answered because there was nothing to say. Sometimes life teaches us through pain, and sometimes the people trying hardest to save us are the ones we hear the least. When we arrived at my house, Ethan stopped in the front yard. The porch light illuminated the old oak tree Charles had planted decades earlier. He stared at the house. I almost let her take this. My throat tightened. No. He looked at me. I thought moving you somewhere else would help. Those words hurt. Not because I didn't already suspect them, because hearing them made the possibility real. You knew. I nodded slowly. I suspected. He sat down on the porch steps. The idea was hers. I remained silent. She said you were lonely. He rubbed his face. She said you needed care. He looked up. She said selling the house would help everyone. The old fear returned. Because that house wasn't just a building, it was Charles. It was our life. It was every memory. And someone had almost convinced my son to erase it. Ethan whispered, I actually considered it. I sat beside him. The cold night air surrounded us. I know. Tears filled his eyes. How can you still sit here beside me? I thought about Charles's letter. Help him home. Not because he deserves punishment, because he deserves grace. I took Ethan's hand. Because you're my son. He began crying again. And this time, I cried with him. The following weeks were difficult. Very difficult. The wedding was canceled. The venue requested payment. Several vendors demanded answers. Friends called. Family members asked questions. Rumors spread quickly. Some people blamed Savannah. Some blamed Ethan. Some blamed me. I stopped trying to explain, because people who were not there would never truly understand. Ethan moved into my guest room temporarily. Mason returned to his old bedroom upstairs. The house slowly felt alive again. Not happy, but alive. Every morning, Ethan made coffee. Every evening, Mason sat beside me while I cooked dinner. And every night, my son looked exhausted. The guilt was destroying him. One afternoon, he sat at the kitchen table, holding his wedding ring. Or what should have been his wedding ring.
I was ready to leave you.
I looked at him.
What?
His eyes filled with shame.
Not completely.
He swallowed.
But Savannah wanted us to move.
I remained silent.
She said distance would help.
I already knew. Isolation. Step by step. Slowly. Carefully. He looked down.
She even showed me retirement communities.
The words hurt, but strangely they no longer shocked me, because now I understood her plan. Remove the mother. Control the son. Access the assets. Secure the future. Her future. Not ours. Several weeks later, Ethan began attending therapy. It was his idea. I need help understanding why I didn't see it. I supported him completely. Sometimes pride prevents people from healing. Thankfully, my son had reached the point where honesty mattered more than pride. Mason also began talking more. The boy had carried enormous stress. One evening, while we baked cookies, he asked,
Grandma? Yes?
Did I ruin the wedding? My heart broke. I put down the spoon. No. His eyes looked uncertain. Everyone was crying. I sat beside him. You saved your dad. He looked down. But everybody was sad. Sometimes people become sad because the truth arrives. He thought about that. Would Grandpa be proud? My eyes filled with tears. Very proud. A month after the wedding, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived. No return address. Just my name. London Harrison. I immediately recognized the handwriting. Savannah. My hands began shaking. Ethan sat beside me. You don't have to open it. But I did. Inside was a short letter. London. You think you won. You think you saved your family. But you destroyed my future. You never accepted me. You poisoned Ethan against me. One day, he will realize what you did. Savannah. I read it twice, then handed it to Ethan. He became pale.
She's still blaming you. I nodded, because some people never accept responsibility. They rewrite the story. They make themselves victims. They blame others for their choices. Rebecca later advised us to keep the letter. The local authorities also wanted a copy because of the ongoing investigation involving financial fraud. For the first time, Savannah's actions were beginning to follow her. And perhaps for the first time in her life, she could not simply disappear. Winter slowly arrived. The leaves disappeared.
Snow covered the yard, and something inside our family began healing. Not perfectly. There were still painful days. There were still difficult conversations. But one evening, I found Ethan sitting in Charles's old chair. He held one of his father's photographs. He would have seen it immediately. I sat beside him. Probably. He smiled sadly. I miss him. So do I. He looked at me. I think he saved us. I looked toward the fireplace. No. He frowned. What do you mean?
I smiled gently. Your son saved us. Upstairs, Mason laughed while playing with the old train set Charles had built decades earlier. The sound filled the house. Warm, safe, alive. And for the first time since the wedding, I truly believed we might become a family again. Spring arrived slowly. The snow melted from the yard. The old oak tree behind my house began growing leaves again. And little by little, our family began growing again too. 6 months had passed since the wedding.
6 months since Mason whispered those words in the church. 6 months since my world had stopped. The investigation into Savannah Monica continued. Rebecca eventually confirmed several things. Her marriage to Daniel had never officially ended. She had used multiple names. She had moved several times. There were other relationships, other financial disputes. No criminal charges had yet been filed, but civil actions were beginning. For the first time in many years, she could no longer simply disappear. Ethan rarely spoke about her. When he did, it was usually with sadness rather than anger. I loved someone who didn't exist. One evening, he said those words while helping me wash dishes. I looked at him. No. He frowned. What do you mean? You loved the person you believed she was. He dried his hands. But she wasn't real. I thought about that. Your love was real. His eyes filled slightly. That matters.
Because it did. Being deceived does not make love meaningless. It simply means trust was given to the wrong person. Therapy helped him. Time helped him. Most importantly, Mason helped him. The two of them became closer than they had ever been. They talked more. They spent weekends together. They went fishing. They attended baseball games. The fear that had lived inside my grandson slowly disappeared. One Saturday afternoon, I watched them repairing Charles's old workbench in the garage. Mason held the nails, Ethan used the hammer, and for a brief moment I saw 3 generations standing together. Charles, Ethan, Mason, the Harrison men. It made me cry. Not because I was sad, because healing had finally begun. One afternoon, Rebecca visited the house. She brought coffee and several folders. Everything involving the trust had been finalized. Everything was protected. Everything Charles had built remained secure. After Ethan left the room, Rebecca sat beside me. He would be proud. I smiled. Charles. She nodded. He knew you would hold the family together. I looked toward the backyard. I wasn't very strong. Rebecca laughed softly. London, you sat through a wedding, protected your son, trusted your instincts, and saved your family. I shook my head. Mason did. She became quiet. Yes, because that was the truth. A 10-year-old boy had changed everything. Summer arrived. The garden bloomed. Neighbors visited again. The house no longer felt heavy. One evening, Ethan sat with me on the front porch. The sun was setting, the same porch where Charles and I had spent decades together. I've been thinking. I looked at him. About what? He took a deep breath. I want to buy a house. I smiled. That's wonderful. But nearby. My heart warmed. So Mason can stay close. He looked at me carefully. And so can you. I laughed softly. You don't need to take care of me. He became serious. I know. He looked toward the yard. But families stay close. Those words meant more to me than he realized, because months earlier, someone had almost convinced him that family was an obstacle. Now he understood that family was protection. Family was memory. Family was home. A few weeks later, Mason and I visited Charles's grave. He carried fresh flowers. We stood quietly beneath the trees. Finally, he spoke. Grandpa saved us. I smiled. In some ways. He thought carefully. But Grandma saved Dad. I looked down. I had help. He nodded. Then he asked, Do you think Grandpa heard me? The question nearly broke my heart. What do you mean? In the church. The wind moved softly through the cemetery. I placed my hand on his shoulder. I think he was very close. Mason smiled. I was scared. I know. I almost didn't say anything. I knelt beside him. But you did. He looked at the gravestone. I think Grandpa wanted me to. Tears filled my eyes. Because maybe he was right. Perhaps love never really leaves. Perhaps the people we lose continue protecting us in ways we cannot explain. Several months later, something unexpected happened. The church where the wedding had taken place held a community dinner. The minister invited our family. At first, Ethan refused. He didn't want to return. Too many memories, too much pain. But eventually, he agreed. As we entered the sanctuary, everything felt different. The same pews, the same altar, the same stained glass windows. Yet now there was peace. Mason sat beside me. Ethan sat beside him. The minister spoke about truth, about forgiveness, about second chances. And for the first time since that terrible day, Ethan smiled inside that church. After the service, he looked at me. You know what I remember most? What? He smiled at Mason. The whisper. Mason blushed. I was scared. Ethan hugged him. You saved me. Those words remained between them. Simple, honest, permanent. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone on my porch. The stars were bright. The air was warm. Charles's empty chair sat beside me. I held his final letter. The paper had become soft from reading it so many times. You have always been the heart of this family. I finally understood. Growing older had not made me invisible. Losing my husband had not made me powerless. Being pushed to the fourth row had not reduced my value, and being a grandmother had not made me weak. Sometimes the quiet people in the room are the ones holding the entire family together. Sometimes children see what adults cannot. Sometimes love means telling difficult truths, and sometimes one whispered sentence can save an entire family. As I looked toward the upstairs window, I saw Mason sleeping peacefully. Across the hall, Ethan's bedroom light finally turned off. For the first time in many years, my son was home. My grandson was safe. My husband's legacy remained protected, and my family had survived. Not because we were perfect, but because one little boy loved his father enough to whisper the truth. Life often teaches us that danger does not always arrive looking dangerous. Sometimes it arrives wearing a beautiful smile, speaking kind words, and promising the future we desperately want. Loneliness can make good people vulnerable. Grief can make us ignore warning signs. Love can sometimes blind us to truths that are standing directly in front of us. But this story is not really about deception. It is about family. It is about listening to our instincts. It is about understanding that older parents are not burdens to remove, but foundations that hold families together. London discovered that growing older did not make her less important. Ethan learned that asking for help is not weakness. Mason proved that courage has nothing to do with age. Children often see the truth because they have no reason to hide from it. Parents continue protecting their children long after those children become adults. And sometimes the people we lose continue guiding us through the lessons they leave behind. If you have a parent who still calls to check on you, treasure them. If you have a grandparent who still tells stories, listen. If someone in your family quietly protects everyone else, thank them. Because one day you may realize they were the heart holding everyone together. And remember this. Love should never isolate you from your family. Love should never require secrecy. Love should never make you feel smaller. Real love brings people together. It does not remove them. If this story touched your heart, I would truly love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever ignored your instincts, or has a child ever noticed something adults missed? Please share your experience in the comments. And if you're watching from somewhere in the world tonight, tell us where you're from and what time it is there right now. Stories like these remind us that none of us are truly alone. If you'd like to hear more emotional family stories about love loss, forgiveness, and second chances, please subscribe and join our community. Take care of the people who love you, and never ignore the quiet voices that speak the truth.